So again, good morning, everyone. Today my talk, it's all about remembering. And so this month we've been talking about what it means to live an inspired life. We've been inspired by the book on inspiration by Wayne Dyer. And we've already talked about how important it is to live in spirit. In order to be inspired, to have that energetic, to have that excitement about living, about possibility, we need to have a deep connection to the divine. Inspiration doesn't come, surprisingly enough, inspiration doesn't come from coming to hear me, don't leave, right? Don't run yet, there's a point. It doesn't come from going to class or to take workshops or doing all of those amazing things we do. Those things can trigger our remembrance of the fact that inspiration lives within us. The only reason why you're inspired by something I say or by a prayer that someone does or something you learn at a workshop is because it awakens something that's already within you. And so we're learning this month about the fact that inspiration comes from the inside out. Inspiration comes from the truth that we are connected to the infinite spirit. And so our goal is to live in spirit. And so we talked about all these different things this month about how important and how we can align ourselves with that. Reverend Dr. Sherry Sorbo last week did a great job talking about how it's by letting go of our masks and stepping into our authentic nature that we are able to not only receive the truth of the divine alive within us, but shine our light into the world. We're learning about accepting who we are just as we are, right? That's such a hard path for so many of us, and it's because we forget. We forget that we are connected to something greater. And when we remember who we truly are, and not only can accept it, but we can begin to honor and celebrate it, then we can honor and celebrate everyone else's differences, and there's a deeper harmony that's revealed in the world. Because we are at peace with ourselves, it always starts within. And so here we are today talking about the fact that it's all about remembering. And if you've been here for any more than 10 minutes, which you all have been now, that you've heard me say at some point that we need to remember God as the center of our lives. That it is all about remembering the divine. But today I'm not just talking about that. Today I'm talking about the fact that what we are called to remember is where we came from before. We're called to remember our spiritual origins. So it's not only the fact that God is alive and that God is part of each and every one of us, but we're called to remember the true nature of our being, which came from before we stepped into these bodies, into this life at this time. Now that's not easy to do. I remember being a child and sitting in my backyard under this big oak tree and trying to remember where I came from before. I remember I had my hands on my temples and I was like, where was I? Where did I come from? You know, and I didn't remember, but I couldn't remember. But it's in those moments, my guess is that each and every one of us has had one of those moments, and maybe it was as you were falling asleep. Or maybe it was in that dream state before you really wake up, that you get a flash of something beyond what we talk about as this life, right? Or maybe it's in those moments, sometimes there's this one hill that I drive up on my way home, and I drive up over the hill and the sun is blaring, right? You go straight into that sun and there's a flash of a moment of blindness, right? Or and there's this experience of expansion to beyond what our mind knows as I move through it, right? And that triggers it for me. Or maybe it's sitting at the base of a mountain or at before the ocean. I don't know what it is for you. But there's something there that reminds us that we are greater than this. Not only intellectually, but on a really deep knowing level. Today's really all about the difference between knowing about something and having the knowing of something. It's about remembering that knowing. And so the book that we've been working with this month, I'm so inspired by it. I know that there's a few left in the bookstore. But what Wayne Dyer is talking about is about moving us beyond our ego selves. right? So the idea that when we came into this body, we took on this personality. And I firmly believe that we all chose to be here. I don't think we got cosmically flung. You know, sometimes it feels like we just got cosmically flung into this life. You know, we didn't. I really believe that we have somehow, some way, we chose. We signed up for this. And for those of us who have had really rocky, rough paths, you were strong enough to sign up for that. And there's some part of you that had that spiritual muscle that said, yeah, I'm going to go in and I'm gonna do this to show something. I don't know what it is. But anytime I've seen someone who has experienced such challenging, difficult things over and over and over again, what I realize is that they are the strong ones. They are the spiritual warriors that have come to show us that there's nothing that can't be overcome. And so when we choose to come into this life, we take on these ego personas, we take on this sense of limitation, we take on this personality, and somehow it's this limitation. Because we forget that we're bigger than that. We forget that there's more to us than that. And we so identify with the ego, with the personality, with our tendencies, with the experiences that we've had in this life experience that we can remember, that we forget the true nature of our being. We forget that we do have that spiritual muscle. And so in this section of the book, the end of the book here that we're moving into this week, there's a whole chapter on this that it's all about remembering. And Wayne Dyer shares a quote from A Course in Miracles. And so this is going to guide us today. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to go over the whole thing with you, and then we're going to go line by line through this. And this is from A Course in Miracles. It says this: the memory of God comes to the quiet mind. It cannot come where there's conflict. For a mind at war against itself remembers not eternal gentleness. What you remember is a part of you, for you must be as God created you. Let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God, still shining in your quiet mind. It's beautiful, isn't it beautiful? So I was inspired by this, and this is what we're going to do today. The memory of God comes to the quiet mind. So when our minds are filled with a noisy dialogue, we shut off the possibility of remembering our true nature. So there's this constant chatter that goes on. Never mind that there's a constant chatter that goes on in the world right now, right? There's all of this, and we're bombarded, right? We are the generation that got connected to television and the radio, and it's constant, and there's all of these messages that are coming. And so no wonder our minds are a reflection of that. So our minds go and go and go and are constantly thinking these thoughts. And so we can't find any memory of the divine or anything beyond that, because our minds are just connected to those thought processes. And so the chatter of the world in as we are bombarded by it from the inside and the outside, it just produces anxiety, stress, fear, worry, emotional reactions. And we all know that leads to actual physiological and physical challenges. There is this deep mind-body connection. And so if we have this mind-body connection, of course we have a mind-spirit connection too. And if our physical bodies can become ill and have disease and discomfort and pain because our mind chatter is negative, what do you think it's doing to our spiritual bodies? It's cutting us off from our source. And so if we allow our minds to go uncontrolled in that hamster wheel of worry, in that hamster wheel of negativity, if we stay on that train there, we're going one place, which is a place of separation. And when you are in a place of separation, when you are in a place of limitation, there's no possibility of you remembering the true nature of your being, because you cut that possibility right out. God comes to the quiet mind. And again, there is a huge difference between knowing about God and knowing God. That's the theme for today. There's a difference in knowing about something and knowing it. We can sit around and talk about God all we want. We can read millions of books about it. Our bookstore is filled with amazing inspiration about God. You can learn a lot about God. We could get a PhD in divinity or theology, and we can talk all about that till the cows come home. But it won't do anything unless we are able to have a deep relationship and connection to the Infinite One, to that divine Spirit of God. Unless we take that step out in faith in any way in our life, we're never going to know God. We're just going to know about God. We can know how Spirit works in life. We can know how we can align to it. We can know how we can put it into practice. But unless we put it into practice, we'll have no experience of it. Again, I know I keep coming back to this analogy. We all know that kale is good for us, but unless you get it in your mouth and swallow it, it's not going to do anything for your body. It's the same thing. That unless we do the spiritual practices to find a way to connect with that divine presence, unless we allow our knowing of God to transcend our knowing about God, we'll have no shift and there'll be no change in our life. I've got so many people who come through over the 20 years that I've been doing this that have been able to sit down with me and have great intellectual discussions about spirit. They think they know everything about it, but their lives are falling apart. And they don't understand. It's because spirituality is a practice. It's a practice in knowing. It's a practice in being. And so sometimes we use the intellectual level to keep ourselves separate from looking at ourselves, from acknowledging the fact of the parts that we don't accept of ourselves, the parts that we aren't comfortable with. And that's not what God is about. God is about embracing and accepting all of you, all the parts of ourselves. And so it was the perfect song choice for today. Because it's in that deep acceptance and knowing that we can move forward in a new way. That we can allow the infinite wisdom of God to come to us and guide us. That we can live in the divine flow. That we can accept the abundance of the universe. That we can really see that possibility is there for us. That we're never alone. And that only comes to the quiet mind. And so we're called to find a way to quiet those thoughts. Now, I've been joking around with my foundations class all fall about how many thoughts we have in a day. I've been making up for those in my class, I've been making up numbers every week that we talk about it. But I actually did the research this week. You'll all be happy to know it's 60,000. They estimate that we have 60,000 thoughts every day. We have 60,000 opportunities to think differently. But the problem is that every day we have the same thoughts. We don't have different thoughts every day. We have the same thoughts every day. And I venture to guess that a big percentage of those 60,000 are the same each day, and they're thoughts of limitation, and they're thoughts of separation, and they're thoughts of unworthiness. We have to flip the switch on that and realize that it is through that thinking process, as we calm those thoughts, we can start to connect with the divine. And so going on, it says it cannot come where there is conflict, for a mind at war against itself remembers no eternal gentleness. So in order to have conflict, there has to be two opposing forces, right? There's two different belief ideas, there's two different aims, there's two different ideas about something, and that we go up against something. And sometimes it can feel in our lives like we're in conflict with everything. Sometimes it can feel like we're in conflict with life. We can be in conflict with our partners and with our children and with our neighbors. Oh, God forbid, we get in a fight with our neighbors, right? Sometimes it feels like the world is in conflict with one another. There can be no peace that comes from a mind filled with conflict. And so the first place to start with this is the conflict that we feel against ourselves. If we are in conflict with the life that we are, the being that we are, then we can never find peace within. And we have to be able to find peace within to be able to create it in our immediate sphere. And when we create it in our immediate sphere, then we shine the light of peace and harmony out into our larger sphere. And then when we all start doing that, then we're beginning to get somewhere. We're starting to create peace on earth, which I absolutely believe is possible in my lifetime. But it takes each and every one of us finding a way to go back within to our own place and find, where is this conflict alive in me? And right now we're digging deep on that. right? We're all digging deep on trying to find the place of why am I fighting, where am I fighting within myself? Because it's so easy to say, look at those people over there, they're all fighting each other. Or, those are the ones. Every time we start to point our finger outside at something that's going on in the world, the truth is we got to go back within and see, where am I in conflict with God and life and myself? Because eternal gentleness comes when we surrender that idea of conflict. Eternal gentleness, that living in the Spirit, comes when we can remember that there is a greater oneness that wants to reveal itself as us. And yet, that chatter is on the hamster wheel. And so sometimes it's easy to slip into that personal righteousness. Sometimes it feels good to be right. Sorry, honey. But I caution us all about that. Because when something happens in our own life and we feel like we're right or have been wronged, have you ever gotten into a dialogue with yourself, with the other person within your own head? Telling them off before you even see them? And you go through the whole conversation in your head. No, I need to tell you, you need to know that, and I was, and you were, and this is, and you are wrong and I am right? So it can, is it just me? I'm like, I'm in trouble now. No. But I caution us against allowing that. Sometimes it feels good because we can get it out in our heads and then we never have to do it out in real, right? But that doesn't even help. It makes it worse. Because when we allow ourselves that, when we don't step higher to try and see our part in any situation, we don't try and see the fact that something's trying to be brought forth in everything that happens, when we disconnect from that possibility, we are planting seeds of separation in this world and in our own lives. And so every time we have a conflict, it plants a deeper seed. And so pretty soon we have a forest of conflicts in our world. And we have of our own experience, and then if each and every one of us is doing that, what do you think the culture is going to be like? What do you think our relationships are going to be like? They're going to be all separate ideas of just that we exist in conflict. But the idea here is that we want to take the higher view. We want to step up into a place where we remember, if we're remembering our source, if we're remembering where we came from, if we're remembering that we are truly rooted and grounded in the infinite one, in that infinite oneness, we have to take our higher view to see that something is being born here. Every time we have a conflict, what's being called forth is more understanding, is more compassion, is more peace and more harmony. That's what's wanting to be born out of that. But the question is, how high do we have to go to find it? How high do we need to go of a perspective to be able to see beyond our own hurt, our own wounding, our own experiences of pain, to be able to see that that pain was not in vain, that we are not being attacked, that we are creating something together, and if we navigate it from the high perspective, then we can find a place of peace. Now this is true in those intimate situations. Now we're headed into the holidays, and so I always love to get you all set to go to Thanksgiving with that family that you're going to go and sit and have Thanksgiving with, right? That sometimes those holidays are not the easiest to go to be with when we have those old pains and those old hurts of what happened 40 years ago and 50 years ago and 10 years ago, that it's hard to find peace after our hearts have been hurt by the ones who should love us the most. But those are the most important ones that we have to heal. Those are the deepest wounds that we carry. And those are the ones that stay with us the longest. And so my invitation for us is to move higher, because when we move that perspective higher, and even if we can't get to a place of completely knowing how to put it all in perspective as a bow, to explain why this happened and how this happened, maybe we move to a place of connecting with Spirit and that compassion and saying, I just want there to be peace here. And if we go to that place, then we open to the divine gentleness guiding us and supporting us and loving us. We invite Spirit into our lives. And there's a greater way of seeing it, and then we can let go of some of those things that we carry a little bit easier. without having to figure out how to do it. When God is alive in our lives, there's a flow that happens, there's a peace that happens, there's a joy that happens that we can't explain. And we don't have to explain it, we just have to embrace it and acknowledge it. That's the knowing God rather than knowing about God. Oh, I love this. What you remember is part of you. The Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard once observed that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forward. So what Wayne Dyer talks about in terms of this part of the quote is that he talks about that sometimes it's easier to understand it if we flip the switch on it. So what you don't remember isn't a part of you. Think about that for a second. What you don't remember isn't a part of you. So if you cannot remember your spiritual origins, you can't connect with your spiritual nature. If you can't remember that you are part of the divine, you can't invite God into your life. Now, we're never not connected to God. We are always connected to God. We are always the divine emanation, but we can convince ourselves that we're not. And because the universe responds to us, it's going to show us that we're not. It's going to say, yeah, you're right. Because that's what the universe always says. Yeah, you're right. So if you believe that you are out there alone on a limb with no help and no support, guess what's going to happen? That's where you're going to be. But if we can remember that we are connected to this divine, if we can remember that we are part of this wholeness, we are part of this oneness, then we can invite it into our experience. And so this is another one of those situations I share a lot about how, we set this path for the year, last year actually. This week we're working on 2019. I'm so excited about the theme for 2019 that we're creating that I can't wait for it. But we did this last year. And I don't know how this title got on this week. But it's a really powerful moment here as we stand here in this time, because for all the things that happen this week in the world, that we need to remember that there's something greater revealing itself. We need to remember that we are one humanity, and that kindness and connection are the most important thing we can embrace and celebrate. But also here we are a week away from, so Halloween's coming up, and right after Halloween is Dia de los Muertos. And so I have been so intrigued by that holiday for so long. And I will admit, no offense of course, but I will admit that I learned a whole heck of a lot from it this year, from that adorable movie Coco. Did anybody see that movie? Oh my God, I love that movie. If you haven't, it's adorable. It's on Netflix. But it's about this holiday, and it's the Mexican holiday of remembering our beloveds. It's about, it's the times when, I'm sure you've seen pictures where they go and they clean up around the graves, and they have parties and picnics and joyful experiences in the cemeteries, and they build ofrendas, these beautiful altars with bright colors and great sweets and all sorts of photos and everything in their homes to remember the dead, remember their ancestors that have gone on. And so it's about remembering who we are. It's about remembering the lineage and the love that's alive at the center of the family. I love that feeling of it. But there are some things that we don't allow ourselves to remember about us. My experience this week is that this was the 10th anniversary of my brother's passing. So I shared some things up on Facebook this week, and I got a lot of texts and emails that people thought that it had just happened. And so I thank you for all the love. But 10 years ago, my brother died in a car accident, and it was one of the worst case scenario where you get the phone call in the middle of the night that he's gone. And what I'm realizing in this process of walking through this grief and watching it and watching my family's grief and the experience of it over the years is that it was really hard to remember the goodness of our relationships because the pain of his passing was so deep. But something happened this year. As the pictures started to change, my siblings, I'm one of 4, and so my other siblings and my brother's kids and some of his friends started to put up pictures a week ahead of the anniversary. It was like a big deal for everyone to mark this decade that we've had without him. And the thing that I realized in this is that this year I could look back a little bit deeper, and I started to remember the things that I had forgotten. Does that make sense? I'm like, remember, forget, yeah. So I remember that I had forgotten the things that I had wanted to remember. Yeah, so the idea was that there was such great joy, and he was so fun, an amazing guy, and all of this amazing parts of my life came together because I was Nick's little sister. And I had cut all of that out. I had forgotten how fun it was when he started taking me to McDonald's for French fries, because he got his license and he was 7 years older than I was that night. So that when he even just going to the arcade, or going when I was a child, or taking me for McDonald's, or when we went to the mall at Christmas and we walked in and I realized I was becoming a teenager because he said, okay, we're going to talk about Mom really loud while we go shopping, okay? Because he didn't want anyone to think that I was like his girlfriend. You know, let's talk about Mom. Okay, well, Mom would like that. Yeah, okay, and so that he was just so fun and fun-loving. And that was a part of me. There was a part that I had lost about myself because I was cutting myself off because of the pain. And so there's this joy in remembering the truth of who we are, and that's the truth not only about our beloveds, but it's the truth about God. If we go through a rough time, we're forgetting the joy of the connection of God because we've got the pain of thinking that God was forsaking us in our pain. But we have to move through that and heal that relationship to allow God to come forth for us. And so the spiritual practice here is that the most effective thing we can do to remember our source is to affirm unhesitantly, I'm first and foremost an eternal spiritual being. I can't be anything but this. I will never doubt it, and I can go within and try to be like God in all of my thoughts and actions. We are called to be like God. And so when we begin this practice and this memory of our spiritual origins begin to emerge, for you must be as God created you. So one of those sayings about the ego that we have taken on in this life is that it's edging God out, right? That it edges God out because we live within this limitation of this idea of ourselves, and we attach so much to being a human rather than being a spiritual being that we forget. And so it's not about making God like us. It's about remembering that we are like God. And so what we know about God is that God is the infinite creator of all things, and that creativity is alive wherever any of God is. So right where you are an incredibly creative being. That you have the possibility to create what you want. You have the possibility to reveal the joy of life that you're wanting to create. Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, said that we can get to a place of an isolated state in which there appears to be no remembrance of God as an actual living and ever-present reality. One where man feels himself to be separated and entirely apart from the eternal good. God is that living and ever-present reality that we move in, that we are with, that's ever with us. And it is that goodness, it is that joy, it is that light that is there for us, but we have to accept it. We have to remember it as the truth. And so he goes on to say, let all this madness be undone for you, and turn in peace to the remembrance of God still shining in your quiet mind. So this madness is living in a state of conflict, it's living in a state of separation. That idea of division creates so much suffering, and it keeps us separated from living an inspired life. Ram Dass, one of the famous meditation teachers, said, I firmly come to the conclusion that there are no thems for me anymore. I can't be told who to hate, who to fight, who to subdue. I only see an us in my heart. That's the goal, to see an us in our hearts. A number of years ago, our organization was merging. There were two sides of Science of Mind, blah, 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 all political, blah, blah, blah. But we were coming together, and my job at the time was like right in the middle of it. And it felt like it was an us and them. And even Science of Mind ministers, I'm not lying, Science of Mind ministers, it felt like we went like this. I'm protecting my truth, you know? And so some lovely person, I don't know who it was, showed up in my office down at Seaside and put a little button on my computer that said them with a circle and a slash through it. And I was like, oh yeah. I remembered that there is no them. It sits on my desk at my home now. Because not only is there no them within our organization, there's no them within the world. There's no them within other religious organizations and us. There's no them within what's going on in politics. There's really no them. There is only an us. And how hard is it to find that? That's why I'm saying that this is the crucial spiritual practice right now, to wake up to the fact that there is no other than us. And the madness is going to be let go of when we can let go of that sense of conflict. And we can turn in peace to the remembrance of God still shining in your quiet mind. This remembrance doesn't shine in our ego mind or our noisy mind or our self-important mind. It shines in a quiet, non-violent, peaceful, loving mind. And so the work then is to remember that. To remember that as we find a place of peace, our spiritual aim is to find a place of peace right within ourselves. And whether we do that by looking at the things that we love, by doing prayer work, by surrendering the conflicts that we've had in our life, and by going within and inviting the divine into our experience, it doesn't matter. It's just the importance that we remember that the foundation of all things are God. And the foundation of each and every one of us is God. And so that means there is a loving, joyful, supportive presence that wants you to be happy, to be peaceful, and to be free. And so my challenge to you in this week is to walk through your life to see God showing up for you, to remind you of the glory and the magnificent being that you already are. And so it is.